We went into the beach, dropped the tailgate, and we got up and went around them. And the first thing I did when I got around them, of course, was hit the deck so I wouldn't get shot at because they were shooting at us. And I looked up and a head rolled across in front of me. And it was one of my buddies. And that was my introduction to Iwo Jima.
Hi, I'm Greg Corumbus. Our guest today is Theodore Below. He is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran of World War II and the Battle of Iwo Jima. And sir, thank you very much for being with us.
You're welcome.
Where were you born and raised, sir?
I was born in Brooklyn. I was raised all over the country. My father was in show business, and so we traveled a lot.
What kind of show business did he do?
Almost anything that would make a buck. He sang, he told jokes, and I don't remember what else.
When did you join the service?
Oh, goodness. On my 18th birthday, which don't ask me when that was because I don't remember well.
Okay. And why did you join the Marine Corps?
Well, I lived in Brooklyn, and I kept seeing these sailors and Army guys all running around drunk, so I didn't see many drunk Marines, so I signed on the Marine Corps. What I realized later was there was no drunk Marines because there was no Marine base there.
So you're saying they might drink once in a while?
Huh?
So the Marines do drink every once in a while?
Oh, only once in a while. Just about every other minute they can get hold of booze.
Where did you do your training, sir?
Well, doggone, I can't think of the name of the base, but it was in South Carolina. Darn.
Paris Island?
Paris Island, that's it.
Okay. And when were you deployed?
Well, after I finished the training in Paris Island, they had opened up a school for parachutists in North Carolina, and I attended that and became one of the first parachute Marines that they had had in a long time. Because the Marine Corps didn't have parachutists in it, and I figure it probably didn't have the money to pay for it either.
So where did they send you after that?
Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and from there we went to, I can't remember, it was in California, but I can't think of the camp's name.
Probably Pendleton.
Yes.
Camp Pendleton?
Right.
Okay. And when did they send you into the Pacific Theater? Or where did they send you? Perhaps was more important.
I don't remember.
Okay. What do you remember about preparing for the Battle of Iwo Jima?
Actually, not much.
Oh. I understand you were stationed on Hawaii for a while.
Yes, I was.
What did you do there?
Learned to swim in the Hawaiian surf and to climb some of their mountains.
Well, that would come in handy.
Oh, yeah. And I also was in a class to become a sniper.
Really?
Really.
What was that like?
Well, it was different. Got a chance to get in a lot of different sensations, to climb up in trees and shoot at things and that kind of stuff.
Did you ever get to use that skill in combat?
No.
They didn't let you do that. So, what do you remember about the Battle of Iwo Jima itself? Do you remember the shoreline, the Japanese resistance? Anything come to mind?
Well, a lot of things come to mind, especially after listening to this stuff about Iwo Jima. We were in the first wave. We came in troop ships, and they put us in Amtraks. Amtrak is kind of like a pickup truck, but it has no wheels but paddles. And so we got lined up to come straight in toward the beach at Iwo Jima. And it happened that a couple of big Navy battleships were in our way. So we had to go in and go around them. And when we were going around them, they were firing at Iwo Jima. So it knocked us pretty close to cold because of all the noise getting those big guns fired right over our heads. We went into the beach. The Amtraks pulled up on the beach, stopped, dropped the tailgate, and we got up and went around them. And the first thing I did when I got around them, of course, was hit the deck so I wouldn't get shot at because they were shooting at us. And I looked up and a head rolled across in front of me. And it was one of my buddies. And that was my introduction to Iwo Jima.
How did you keep going after that?
Because that's what I was supposed to do. I had gone to different demolition school, and so I was had a lot of practice blowing things up. And one of the first things they did was to send us up on the I wouldn't even call them hills. They were little rises, and what they really were caves. And the Japs were in the cave, and it was our job to blow them up, or my job. And so I had gone up there with a 20-pound pack of TNC strapped to me, and the trick was to get to the emplacement opening and throw the 20 pounds of TNT into the cave. The problem was that if it stayed in there very long, I mean, like 10, 15 minutes, they would throw it back out. So we had mechanical fuses, and the fuses were set for 19 seconds, which is way too long. So we would count 1 chimpanzee, 2 chimpanzee, 3 chimpanzee, until you about 16 or 18, because you wanted to throw it in there before 19. And so I counted, with the first fuse, I counted to 17 chimpanzees, and that was too long. So then I counted to 19 and threw it in and fell flat on my face so that it blew over me. And that's the first thing we did at Iwo Jima, and it's the thing I remember probably the most about Iwo Jima. It was certainly different than any place I had ever been.
Why?
Well, for one thing, it started out, after we hit the beach, somehow the Japs stopped the Navy from shooting at us, and we were stuck on the beach. We couldn't get up. We couldn't go back to the boats. And so we were stuck on the beach for 4 days with no I shouldn't say refreshments, but no food and no ammunition and no water. Well, as I had been a parachutist, we had learned to survive on what was called Composition D2 or something like that. It was chocolate candy. And it was a chocolate bar that was about an inch thick. And the only way you could really handle it was to put it on a rock or on a helmet and break it into pieces and then stick it in your mouth. And it usually lasted about an hour. What I don't remember, and we must have had, was water. We had canteens, which took about a quart of water, and that we certainly must have gotten water somehow, but I don't remember how.
Yeah, 4 days without water would have been a big problem.
Yes, it was.
So then, how did you get off the beach?
Well, that's when I went up and blew up caves.
But how did you get up there if you were pinned
Walked,
down?
I guess. I don't really remember anything about it except that I wound up there doing it.
Okay. And is that what you did for the entirety of the battle?
I doubt. But I remember we moved up, I don't know which end it was, but it was the other end anyway, not Suribachi. And one of the things I want to make a note, they put up a lot of noise about raising the flag at Suribachi. And that really burned us up because those guys got up there and they raised the flags in 5 days and they stopped combat. They just sat up there. And we went 30 days to finish up the island. And so it really got to us that they were very famous and heroes and everything, and here they didn't fight for longer than 5 days, and we did 30, or about 30. So we moved up to what I think was the north end of the island, and while we were doing it, we came across a landing strip, and a big bomber, one of ours, with the crew, landed on there. And we realized then why we were there to provide that landing strip. It was just about 100 miles from Japan. And so we knew then what the reason was for us to be up there risking our necks. And I remember going up to the end up there at the end of the runway, and one of the things I remember, we would have foxholes. The sands of Iwo Jima were fairly easy to dig in. They were coarse sand and they were black. And the way we used to work is that there'd be 2 guys in a foxhole, and one guy, when you went to sleep, the one guy would stay awake and be a guard, and you'd sleep for 2 hours, and then you'd switch. And I was sleeping as a demolitionist. I couldn't carry a carbine and all the junk I was carrying, so I carried a .38 revolver, which my father had sent to me, Smith & Wesson. And I used to sleep with that cocked, which is not very smart. And sometime, all of a sudden, I heard my buddy who was guarding me get up and run from the foxhole. And so I was holding the pistol on my chest, and I looked up, and I saw this Japanese Marine. And I want to make a note that although we hated Japanese Marines, they were entirely different than regular Japanese. You think of Japanese as being little people, and these guys were at least 6 feet tall. And they were very good soldiers. But anyway, I heard and saw this Marine, and I saw the glitter of a knife. And I pulled a pistol up and shot him. And he disappeared. And the morning when it got light, I got out and didn't see the body, but there were a couple of big pools of blood, so I must have hit him. And it's something I still remember, those kind of. The other thing I remember about Iwo is I was feeling pretty miserable, and in the middle of the night, I looked up at the sky, and the moon was behind clouds, and it was beautiful. And I thought to myself, well, there is still some beauty in life. And another thing that I remember is that we were in our foxholes during the day, and a couple of stretcher carriers came by me. And what is interesting is we had stretcher bearers who were going out and bringing people back in, and the only way you can do that is to stand one at each end of the stretcher and try to run for some place that where you can hide it and take care of them. And all the stretcher bearers were conscientious objectors and no regular.
They refused to fire guns, yes.
And you know, we had nothing but respect for them. And speaking of that, I remember seeing, I think probably a couple of days later, when a stretcher came by, and the guy on the stretcher had lost an arm, and he had his artery in his teeth, trying to keep from bleeding to death. And I still can see that sometimes. So it was not a very good place, and as I said, it took about 30 days to finish Iwo Jima, and on the 29th day, I was up at the other end of the island where that was about the end of it, and I was told by a lieutenant to take a bazooka, which is basically a rocket that you shoot out of a piece of pipe, and to shoot at a 5-inch gun that was shooting at our people. And the way you did that, you'd take and put the pipe on your shoulder, and you had a helper who then shoved the rocket in there, and there were two wires that they connected, and once they're connected, they'd slap you on the shoulder, and that told you that if you pressed the trigger, it would fire the rocket. The problem was we hadn't learned how to handle or make bazookas that would just fire straight, and they fishtailed all over the place. So I had to fire this 5-inch gun, and of course it didn't come anywhere near it. And when my helper had hooked it up, I told him, I said, once you get the wires hooked, we were on this, at the base of a Japanese anti-aircraft gun. And right in back of us was I think there's about a 20-foot deep ditch. So I told him, the minute you give me that hand signal, they tapped on the back. I said, jump the hell out of here and down in the ditch. So he tapped, and where I fired, and he tapped and jumped down, and the rocket never got near that 5-inch gun. And so they fired, and that anti-aircraft gun came off its mount and landed on me. And so I was lucky enough to be hauled off in a stretcher to the naval base or whatever, and I was sent off, and I spent 3 months, in 3 different Navy hospitals. And then they discharged me, and it was the end of the war.
Mr. Below, we only have a couple of minutes left here. What do you think of most when you think of your service to our country, and in particular at Iwo Jima?
I probably think of most is how many of our people lost their lives, or a good part of their lives, protecting our country. And I have always felt that it was well worth it. And that those guys were doing what I had done and what we should have done, because we live in a great country.
And finally, sir, what would you like to be sure that younger generations know about your service and the service of your generation?
That there are times in our history, or whatever you want to call it, that the country that we live in, that is really a wonderful country, is worth defending.
Sir, thank you so much for your time with us today. We truly appreciate it. And most of all, thank you for your tremendous service to our country.
Well, I'm really proud that I did, and my friends did, because it's what we should do. Thank you.
You're most welcome, sir. Theodore Below, U.S. Marine Corps veteran of World War II and the Battle of Iwo Jima. I'm Greg Corumbus. This is Veterans Chronicles.